Hello and welcome to A Ready Defense with me, Joe Puckett. I'm just giving this series or creating this series for those who may be interested in looking at why Christians believe what they believe, and maybe yourself have been asking questions about what you should believe. So I just thought I'd throw a series out there for those who may be seeking for or searching for answers to questions such as faith and religion, and what the meaning of life is, and why we're here, and is there a God? What are human beings? And what am I supposed to be doing in this world? And so these are heavy questions I'm going to be addressing in this series. And it's just going to be a temporary series for a while. I don't know how many exactly it's going to be or end up being, but I know I'll be addressing questions like, is there a God first? And then we're going to be looking at how do we know the Bible is the inspired Word of God? And then questions like why we know, or why do I think that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? And then we'll look at questions of meaning. Why did God create us? And what am I supposed to be doing here? But also, how do I become saved? And we'll talk about what that means, because I know sometimes people kind of throw out these terms and we wonder, what on earth does that mean? So let's talk about, first, does God exist? So there are a few different arguments I want to look at in this particular video. One of which has to do with just why does anything exist at all? And then we're going to look at what's called the cosmological, or the Kalam cosmological argument. That is what started it all off, if there is a beginning. And then we'll look at the moral argument. That is, how do we explain the existence of moral facts in the world? So the first thing I want to look at is the question I want to ask is, why does anything exist at all? You ever stop and ponder? I mean, here you are, you're existing, you're conscious, you're living your life, there is a world around us, the universe does in fact exist, that's sort of a given in this, but why? This isn't exactly the same question as how. How does the world exist the way it does? Many scientists, try to address that question. That's an important question. That's sort of the creation versus evolution debate. That's a very important question, one that we may look at in this series, but that's not the same question that I'm asking here. The question I'm asking here is not how does things come to exist, but it's why do they exist in the first place? Why is there a universe at all? Why are you here at all? Why is anything here? And when you think about it, does it really make sense? I mean, everything that we know about depends on something else for its existence. I depended on my parents for existing. You depended on yours. Trees depend on seeds that starts it off, and the ground, and the sun. In fact, the sun depends on its existence. The moon depends on its existence. Everything is dependent, or the word is contingent. Everything depends on something else. Nothing is just a sufficient explanation for itself, in other words. So everything has an explanation or a cause for its existence in some way, shape, or form. Well, if everything in the universe is that way, even if you say the Big Bang is the explanation or whatever to the sun and the galaxies and all of that, you still have to ask, okay, what is the explanation for a Big Bang? I mean, and I don't just want to think about our universe. Take whatever exists at all. Say whatever it is that does in fact exist. It still needs an explanation. Here's what I mean. Think of it this way with a sort of a formal argument. So think all contingent or dependent, that is things that depend on other things for their existence. So all contingent things have sufficient explanations for their existence. Again, I have an explanation for my existence. There's an explanation for this desk's existence. There's an explanation for trees and grass. There's an explanation for the sun, the moon, and the stars. There's explanations for everything in the universe. Well, all these things have explanations for their existence. Therefore, when you think of the entirety of the entire universe, everything that exists, that is known to exist, even if you have another universe like ours, that universe also needs an explanation for existence. The entirety of the contingent things that we see has to have an explanation, but not just any explanation. It can't just be another contingent explanation. Somebody might say, well, one universe gave birth to this universe. Okay, but that universe presumably follows the same laws that we have in our universe. So if that caused our universe, what caused that universe? Why does take the whole entirety of everything that exists? It demands and cries out for an explanation. Why? Because they're all contingent. Let me explain it with a ball. Okay, let's say this ball represents everything that exists. Everything. Our universe, and if you want to say there's multiple universes, whatever. It all is represented by this ball. Everything that exists. Well, everything in this ball is contingent. Therefore, the ball itself is contingent. What do I mean? So everything in the universe or universes is contingent, dependent on other things for its existence. If that's true, then the entire thing itself is contingent and demands an explanation. So all of reality demands an explanation for its existence. Well, some might say, well, wait a minute. This is the part and whole thing. You're committing a fallacy, Joe. The fallacy is just because the parts of the universe is contingent, that doesn't mean the whole of the universe is contingent. Yes, it does, and here's what I mean when I say that. Think of a wall that is constructed by construction workers, the whole wall. And say the wall is built by bricks, individual bricks. And the bricks are there because of the construction workers. So the construction workers cause the bricks to go on top of one another. So there's the parts of the wall, the bricks. Well, if you can say the construction workers caused the bricks to be placed on the wall, to build the wall, you can also say that the entirety of the wall was put there by construction workers. So the bricks were put there by construction workers. Therefore, the entire wall was put there by construction workers. So when we think about all the little parts of the universe, trees, stars, moons, galaxies, people, animals, all these things cry out for an explanation beyond themselves. If that's true, then the entirety of the whole thing cries out for an explanation. So here's the ball, and here's the entirety of reality, of all the things that exist. Well, if the entirety of reality is contingent, then you have to have an explanation. So why does anything like this exist at all? Why does anything exist instead of nothing? We can imagine nothing existing. Stars didn't have to exist. The moon didn't have to exist. The earth didn't have to exist. Life didn't have to exist. We know that this is true. Well, if that's true, then the entirety of the universe or the entirety of reality didn't have to exist. So if this ball representing all of reality didn't have to exist, why does it? Well, there must be then. The conclusion necessarily follows. There has to be something that is non-contingent, something that is necessary to be a sufficient foundation for all things that depends on it. There has to be. Because if we just add another contingent thing, like another universe, well, that's part of this ball. Everything that's contingent, everything that's found in reality depends on something else. We can't just find another contingent thing because that also demands an explanation. This goes back to the question, well, if God explains the universe, then who explains God? Where does God come from? Well, if God is just a contingent thing like the rest of the universe, then that's a good question. God would have to be put in here, and God would need an explanation. However, because the buck has to stop somewhere, the dominoes have to start falling somewhere. So if this ball is everything that exists and it's contingent, then everything must have a necessary foundation. It has to stop somewhere. There has to be something that explains itself for its own existence. It needs nothing else to explain it. It is existence by definition. To say that this foundation doesn't exist is just another way of saying existence doesn't exist, which is nonsensical. It's like seeing a round square or something like that. It's nonsensical. Existence obviously exists. If existence is necessity, then that serves as the foundation for everything that is in existence. The contingent things. Well, what serves or qualifies as a foundation or for all things, for all of reality? Well, again, it has to be a necessary thing. It has to be a non-contingent thing that exists. Well, that sounds an awful lot like God. Now, some people could say, well, no, it could be something else. But no, I do think that that is what we should be calling God. Now, why? Can we say anything more to support that kind of conclusion? I think so. Because anything that is caused to exist can explain in some way, shape, or form the cause of its existence. Let me explain. So you have a piece of art. If you look at the art, you know that there was an artist. You don't have to know the artist. You don't have to see the artist. You just know by the work itself that there's an artist. Clearly, the Mona Lisa, or take anything, Michelangelo, whatever he made, all the work of art that has ever been made, we know that there is an artist behind that. Well, if there's an artist, we can know a little bit of something about the artist by looking at the art. Not much, but we can know a little something. We can know maybe what their preferred types of paints that they would use, what kind of canvas they might use. We might know a theme. We might see a theme that they like to paint. They might like more outside stuff, or they might like to paint people or animals or what have you. We can see what their preferences were by the paint or the art that they create. We can learn a little bit of something about the artist by looking at the art, their talent, their skill, etc. Well, if the universe, again, is caused to exist by this foundation, we can look at the universe and know a little bit of something about the cause. Just like we can know the art, look at the art and know a little bit about its cause or the artist. So think of the universe as art. We can look at or think about who is or what is the artist behind the scenes. Well, we can see some things that this foundation, that this creator, if you like, we can know what kind of things maybe they like, or he likes, or she likes, whoever this foundation is. We see that they sure like life because life exists. Consciousness exists, so maybe they're conscious, or he or she, whatever the foundation is conscious. We know that there's moral truths in this creation, so there must be a moral type of entity. It's obviously a powerful entity to create the universe even that we observe. Very intelligent, because there's so much intelligence embedded in the creation. So just by looking at creation, we can know some things about the foundation. One, that it's very powerful. Number two, it's very intelligent. Number three, that it seems to be a moral being, because there's moral right and wrong in the creation. Number four, there seems to be life or consciousness. You may think, well, how does that prove that that the foundation is life and conscious? Well, because any cause cannot exceed, any effect cannot exceed the cause. It can't be better or greater than the cause. Whatever somebody creates, it can't be qualitatively better than them. The cause, in other words, has to be greater than any effect. This is true of science. This is true of common sense. Well, whatever qualitatively exists in the creation must, at least of equal or greater measure, exist in the cause. So if there's consciousness in creation, there must be a greater or superior conscious state in the cause. If morality, moral ethics, right and wrong exists in creation, there must be a equal or a superior moral nature of this foundation. If there's power, if there's intelligence, etc., there must be equal or greater levels of quality of all of these things. So just by looking at creation, we can see that it's powerful, intelligent, moral, conscious, and maybe some other things too. So this is, I think, evidence of an existence of God. Now, we haven't gotten to the name God yet, but that sure makes sense. That argument seems consistent with the claim that there is, in fact, a God. But there's another argument that we'll look at quickly, and it's called the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, the Kalam cosmological argument, by the way, none of this that I'm presenting here is just absolute new to me. I'm not coming up with brand new ideas here. You can look at and find stuff like this all over the internet. I'm just trying to give a simple explanation for some of these things. And if you have any questions, by the way, put it in the comments box below, and I'll get to them later. But you can read people like Josh Rasmussen, William Lane Craig, other people to get stuff that do far better job than I do. But the Kalam cosmological argument basically says, okay, all things that begin to exist has a cause for its existence. All right, that makes sense, doesn't it? Things that begin has to have a cause for its beginning. Well, the universe has a beginning. Therefore, the universe must have a cause for its existence. Now, it hasn't always been true that science has believed that the universe had a beginning. They used to believe what's called the steady state model of the universe. Well, that's pretty much been done away with in favor of a Big Bang model of the universe, or some kind of beginning of the universe itself. And they know the universe had to have a beginning for a lot of reasons, the red shifts of the stars and things like this. But they know just based on the second law of thermodynamics. Second law of thermodynamics basically says everything's aging. It's winding down. It's growing old. Well, if things are growing old, winding down, if you build a house, it might be brand new now, but in 50 years, it's going to be wind down, or 100 years, it might even be totally decrepit. Well, I don't know. Everything seems to work that way. We age. Everything ages. Trees age. The moon ages. Everything ages in the universe. If the entirety of the universe is aging, and it is, kind of like a clock that's winding down, there must have been a time in its past when it was fully young or fully wound up. So if you go backwards in time, if it's aging, it couldn't be eternally, couldn't have an eternal history or past, because there must be a beginning if it's aging. Call it the Big Bang if you want to, whatever the case might be, we know the universe had a beginning. So if everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence, what is the cause for the existence of the universe? Well, that's where different debates, there are some scientists who still say, well, even though there's a beginning to our universe, there's just a multiverse. There's just a series of universes popping up all over the place, and we're just one out of many. Well, even still, you can't have an infinite past of ongoing created universes. Why? Because you can't have one moment or one physical event happening after another physical event happening after another physical event happening and leading up to our current moment. You can't do that. Here's why. If you have an infinite past series of events, an infinite past series of events, then no matter where you are in that past series of events, you will always have an infinite past series of events before that. So if there's an infinite past series of events from our time, then even if you go back 1 trillion years, there's still an infinite past before that time. So in other words, if you count from infinity, if you can't really begin any time, but if you were counting from infinity up to our current moment, how long would it take to get to our current moment? Infinite. Right? It would be infinite to get to our current moment. And in other words, if you're counting in infinity, I can't even say it, if you count infinitely toward our direction, you could never arrive here because it's infinite. Therefore, the current moment right here, right now that we're at proves that the universe is not infinite, or the past is not infinite. Well, if that's true, that's something pretty astounding. It's kind of like if you illustrate it this way, if this helps. Think of beads, a line of beads. Here's a red bead right here. But before this red bead, there's a series of white beads, and it goes back on into infinity. Well, start counting, if you could, if it were possible. It's counting at the beginning of infinity, but there's not a beginning of infinity. But if you start counting in the direction of this red bead, you would never arrive at it, because it's an infinite series of counting. And wherever you are in the count, you're still an infinite number away from the red bead. So time cannot be infinite, at least not time the way we think of it, a series of physical events happening one after another. So there has to be a beginning to our universe. Oh, all right, or it has to be a cause. If there's a beginning, then there must be a cause. Well, again, the cause has to be greater than the effect. We pointed that out in the last argument. If the cause has to be greater than the effect, then the cause must not be part of the universe itself. Obviously, that's the case. The universe cannot create itself out of nothing. That's nonsensical. The universe would have to first exist before creating itself to exist. And that's a contradiction. So the universe, if it had an absolute beginning, could not have been there to create itself. So something other than the universe itself must have created it. All right, well, what is other than the universe? Now, some have just bitten the bullet and said, some atheists bit the bullet, say, nothing caused the universe to exist. Yes, it all had a beginning, but nothing caused it to exist. And they try to use things like maybe the quantum fluctuation or quantum physics or something like that. And they're very equivocal in their use of the word nothing there, by the way. They don't really mean the word nothing. Alan Guth and others, when they say there's nothing, they don't really mean nothing. Lawrence Krauss, he has a book talking about the universe came about because of nothing. But when they say nothing, they really mean like a quantum vacuum or something of that nature. Whatever it is, it's not nothing. There's a whole lot of something going on. So that's not the absolute beginning. So the universe can't explain itself. And it can't arise literally from nothing. When you think of nothing, even though our brains can't fully fathom nothing, but nothing is nothing. And nothing can't create or cause something. It's just nonsensical. So if that's true, the universe is not eternal. It could not create itself out of nothing. And it had to be created or started or began to exist or caused to exist from something other than or outside of itself. Again, we're getting really close to what we call God. Because God, the way we say it, God is transcendent. He's outside of this universe. He's outside of time as we know it, anyways, as we think of it as a physical series of events. And I know that other ways to define time. That's beyond the purpose of this video. So again, God fits the bill. Again, you can't say it like some people, well, then how do you explain God? Well, notice I said, all things that begin to exist have a cause. Well, God would be something just like the previous argument. He's the foundation, he's the ultimate explanation of all things, that himself does not require an explanation because he is non-contingent. Therefore, he's never had a beginning. Therefore, he is necessary, unlike anything else. He is the explanation of his own existence. So he fits the bill. God fits the bill for all of these arguments that we fit. And they point direct in the direction of God. All right. Last one, and we'll end this video, at least for now, is the moral argument. The moral argument basically says that if there are objective moral truths, then there must be a moral lawgiver. All right? There are objective moral truths, therefore there must be an objective moral lawgiver. Or, I think William Lane Craig's words at the argument this way: if God does not exist, moral truths cannot exist, or do not exist. Moral truths do exist, therefore God must exist. Let me put it simply. We all know intuitively that there are moral facts about the world. And if we reject that, then we're only rejecting it in word, we don't really reject it in practice. Here's what I mean. If I were to say, okay, stomping on babies, human babies, just for fun is immoral, I think we'll all agree to that. Intuitively, we just know. Now, if you're one of those that say, well, maybe not. Maybe it's not just immoral. Maybe it's just something that we shouldn't do because of evolution or because it goes against the survival of species. Well, if you don't think stomping on babies is truly, genuinely immoral, objectively immoral, then, as Craig puts it, you don't need an argument, you need a therapist. Yeah. So, no argument is going to please a person that says that. So let's just agree that there are moral facts in the world. It has to be objective and universal. We can't say that there are moral facts. There's my moral facts and your moral facts, and those may differ. Well, if I'm the creator of my own moral facts, then it's not objective. It's not truly moral or universal for everybody. And therefore, if my moral facts just say that stomping on babies for fun, well, maybe somebody else's moral facts doesn't say that. But we all say, no, you're under the moral law. You can't be stomping on babies for fun. Therefore, if your own personal moral ethics doesn't say stomping on babies just for fun is wrong, then you are wrong for holding that view. Well, if they're wrong, then there must be a moral absolute standard for all humanity. Well, where does that come from? It doesn't come from me, it doesn't come from you. We already said that. Individually, it just can't happen. Common sense tells us no. That's what the Nazis tried to argue when other countries tried to stop them from doing what they did to the Jews. They said, well, what gives you the right to tell us we were wrong or that's immoral? What nation has the right to tell our nation what to do or what not to do? Well, obviously, and the Nuremberg trials said the same thing. You forget just one thing, that we're all under a moral truth, a moral lawgiver, the universal moral law. And deep down, if we're honest with ourselves, we just know it's true. There are universal moral truths. Now, evolutionists, who are atheists anyways, has to say it's all naturally just evolved. Well, the problem with that is, if it's just because of nature and it just evolved that way for all of us to have, then we could have evolved with any set of moral truths if it just happened to suit survival. You've got these booby birds. If you've ever heard these booby birds, they exercise siblicide. These birds in the nest, when they're born, they kill each other. The siblings will kill each other and kick each other out of the nest for survival. Now, if you give booby birds a brain like ours all of a sudden, then that would be the morally ethical thing to do. Kill the siblings is a morally good thing to do for booby birds. That would be what they've naturally evolved to do. Absolutely not. It's not sufficient. Evolution is not a sufficient explanation for moral truths. It might be some kind of explanation for natural truths, but if evolution is what created moral truths, then evolution just says what is, not what is ought to be. It's just a fact. We do certain things. Even if we feel like we ought to do them, there is no universal ought. It's just luck of the draw. Just so happens to evolve the kind of truths or things that, and there's no absolute truth to that. What if we evolved, like the booby birds, we evolved to say killing siblings or rivals for our own survival is perfectly appropriate? Well, no. Human beings, instinctively we know that there is a transcendent, higher than us, moral truth that exists in this world. All right? If that's the case, if you're accepting that part of it, well, there needs to be an explanation for moral truth. Where does this moral sense come from? Now, there are those who say, well, they're just abstract objects. Moral truths are abstract. They're not clinging to anything, kind of like a Platonist view. Plato believed that there was another world, a perfect world, a Platonic world of abstract objects. Well, okay, that's one explanation some people like to give. All right, it is outside the world, and it's in the world of abstract objects. That is eternal. And then the other explanation is there's a personal explanation. A personal God is the source of these moral truths. Well, which one do we go with? The abstract objects things does not make sense. Abstract objects do nothing. The number 2 does nothing. It doesn't cause anything. Abstract objects, it is well recognized, doesn't cause anything to happen. So if there's abstract ideas out there in the world, why or how are they connected to us? It doesn't cause themselves to be put on us. The abstract objects cause nothing. They're just ideas. And it could be argued that if they're just ideas, ideas require a mind. And a mind is exactly what we say about God. So abstract truths do exist. I believe that. But they can't just be out floating on their own. They have to be ideas, and ideas require a mind to have them. So, what's the best explanation for the moral truths we experience? That there is an outside, transcendent, moral being, a person, a personal explanation. One that has a mind and has a moral nature. Now, the whole question, the Euthyphro dilemma of, well, okay, does God tell us what's right and wrong because it's right and wrong? Or does God just arbitrarily choose what's right and wrong, as if he could make anything right or wrong? No. God can't just freely say that certain immoral things are now moral. And why do I say God can't say that? Because, and that goes, okay, somebody say, well, then God is under a moral law above him. No, that can't be either. If that's true, then there's a supremacy above God. There's some explanation above God. So how do we explain this dilemma? How do we get out of this dilemma? Is morality above God, or is morality just arbitrarily chosen by God? I would say it's neither. Morality is God. God, the personal God, is just a moral being. Morality springs out from his nature, and therefore it explains why it exists in the creative acts that he did. I know that doesn't explain the existence of evil, but that's a whole nother video by itself. All right, I know that there's a lot more to be said about that, but here's just some thoughts for you to consider, a ready defense for you to give, some ideas out there that I do believe that there's a God, and that's all we've established in this video here. We'll talk about another video and in other videos about what kind of God is it specifically, hopefully, ideally, leading us to the Christian faith. Thank you for joining me. You can hit the like and maybe subscribe, and you could be looking out for future videos. Um, and I'll be producing them very quickly, very soon, so be watching out for them as we do this series. Again, A Ready Defense with me, Joe Puckett. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon.